Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about how to make the eyes sharper in images. So as we all know, as portrait photographers, and in particular me as a beauty photographer, a lot of the time we really want our subject's eyes in photographs to be the focus or to be very sharp. So there are times where you can obviously get around this if you're really trying to be creative or you want to have that creative aspect to your shots, but 99% of the time you want the subject's eyes to be the real focus of the image and you want them to be very sharp. So this is a question that I do get asked a lot, and it's how to ensure that they are sharp and how to get sharper images. And for the most part, I think a lot of people have a few things or a combination of things that make it more of a struggle to ensure that the eyes are sharp in an image. So I do want to talk about a few points today that I really feel help with that. So getting straight into it today, I want to talk about the first point, and that is by using a more narrow aperture or a smaller aperture. So if I'm photographing beauty portraits, particularly in a studio, I usually work with f11 and above because I prefer to have the skin in focus, of course, with beauty photographs, but also I really need those eyes in focus too. So I want to have everything realistically in focus so I can work with it later on in post-processing as well. So for those of you who work outdoors, I would just use a smaller aperture than what maybe you're used to using. If you're using something that's wider, around f2.8, that is quite shallow in terms of depth of field. So you might find that it is harder to get the focus on the eyes all the time, and it's not as easy to consistently get the eyes in focus. So that is one recommendation that I would make if you're really struggling to get the eyes in focus a lot of the time, especially with close-up portraits. Definitely look at using a more narrow aperture. Another setting to add to that is using a faster shutter speed. So if you're doing a lot of location work and you're finding that the eyes are just not in focus a lot of the time, and you are used to using a slower shutter speed, if you're getting the model to move around quite a bit or things are kind of happening in motion, it is important to use a faster shutter speed to make sure you do capture that frame sharply and making sure that the eyes are going to be completely in focus as well. That's another little tip along with using a more narrow depth of field that I feel really does help. And they are very basic tips. They are stuff that probably you guys do already know to an extent, but it is something to keep in mind if you're really having those struggles consistently of not getting the eyes in focus with your portraits. Another thing that I quickly want to talk about here that not everyone actually picks up on immediately, but if you are using a macro lens, for example, like I use the Canon 100mm f2.8. So usually I do have a very narrow aperture of f11 and above, but when I'm taking those macro shots, because it's just so close up, the focal length between the subject and where I'm taking the image is very, very narrow. So you do find that things still won't be brought into focus when you're talking about lashes and when you're really looking at the details of the eye, and you really need to get them in focus that way, especially for macro portraits. I find that it's easier if you've got a lens like the 100mm to step back and then crop in. So it ensures that if you're stepping back and you're taking the image, that it is getting the entire eye in focus and not just the iris or not just the lashes. Because that's another thing that really gets annoying after a while when you tend to notice up close that things aren't going all in focus. You want the entire eye in focus and it's not happening. So that is one tip that I'd highly recommend if there's any aspiring beauty photographers out there or anyone that does like taking up a very close portrait in studio or outdoors. Definitely look at just taking a step back and cropping in. That's going to be your best bet of getting everything in focus that you need to have. One other mention that I would make here in your in-camera settings to really help the eyes stand out and to make sure that they are sharp is single point autofocus. So this is going to ensure, as long as you are selecting the point that is going to be over your subject's eyes in camera, this is going to be a really important thing to help the eyes stand out as the feature of the shot and to ensure that they are sharp, because it is going to make sure that it focuses in on that particular area of the photograph. So ensuring that you've got the single point over the eyes is always the way to go, especially if you are using a wider aperture and you want that blur, but you still want the eyes to be very sharp. That's going to really help with having a wider aperture and in using that as well. So definitely look into single point autofocus and ensuring that that is hovering over the eyes of the subject. And my last tip for ensuring that the eyes are very sharp in your images is to use a high pass filter in post-processing. For those of you guys who don't know what that is, I do have a tutorial on that on YouTube, so I will link that down below. But that will involve really honing in on certain areas of the image and making sure that they pop as much as they possibly can, especially if they're slightly out of focus. A high pass filter can really help bring back that detail. So that's something that I'd recommend if you do have something that's slightly out of focus, or if you just want to make sure they're as sharp as possible. That is something that I would recommend adding in post. But I would say for sharp images and sharp eyes in particular, most of the work has to be done beforehand. I would really recommend making sure that you get your images as sharp as possible in camera when you're taking the images, because it can be very difficult later on to really bring that detail back. Okay guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video today, and I hope you learned something new. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do, as I've got so many videos that I'll be posting in the next few months. So as I said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video today, and if you have any tips for ensuring that your subject's eyes are sharp that you'd like everyone to know about, put them in the comments section below. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are looking for more tips on this subject. So thanks again guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!